This is Lori Elliott with Conceptual E. Welcome back to Mapping the DNA of an Idea. This is Module 6, and here we'll focus on the components of the seed model canvas, solutions, stakeholders, and stakeholder relationships. In the previous module, we talked about how to elaborate the problem section of the seed model canvas. So in this module, we'll continue going through these particular sections using the case study. I'll give you an overview first of what a solution is and what a product or service is within that. That will help you as you are working through questions designed to help you generate, select, and define the solution you will enter or develop for your business model. You will see that digging deeper into solutions for your venture can help you get a better understanding of the problem itself, your stakeholders, especially your customers, and stakeholder relationships. Remember now that the research, reflection, questioning, and designing processes are very iterative, particularly at the early stages or the middle stages of development with a product, service, or solution. Now, in terms of our module objectives, we'll first have you learn about solutions, a combination of products or services. Next, we will continue elaborating the case study business model in an activity focused on the solutions component. Then we'll discuss key aspects of value in conjunction with stakeholders and stakeholder relationships. And then finally, you will elaborate the stakeholder and stakeholder relationships component of the seed model canvas. Do you have any questions, or are there any terms that you're not familiar with? If so, inform the facilitator and they will pause in order to take note of that and then integrate it into the discussion at the appropriate time in this module. And remember, this is a recorded session of a live run workshop, so we are adapting for that purposes here. Now, let's look at our seed model canvas. Okay, and again, make sure that you pull out the seed model canvas that you've been working on and all the different outputs and tools that you've been using, because you'll be using them again in this module. So here's the seed model canvas again. You can fill in the solutions section. It's highlighted here. Again, it will be with bulleted points, words or phrases that briefly describe one of your solutions. And in our case with the case study, we actually only have one. If you are working on multiple possible solutions, you will mostly likely need to fill out a separate seed model canvas for each unique solution. The seed model canvas is only for the most high-level information. Even a whole solution with multiple related components is documented using the same seed model canvas. You'll need to record additional detail in the concept document. In fact, many people begin to unpack business models using the concept document outline at the same time they work on the seed model canvas. So what we're having you go through as exercises and activities, this is a normal process. This is how we do it, in fact. Earlier in this workshop, I mentioned the different kinds of markets usually require different types of solutions. The different types of solutions include commodities, products, services, bundled solutions like software applications, experiences, and offerings target to individual development or identity focused on a person's identity. Now in this, remember, always think that these are things that serve people. That's the frame of reference that you want to create. And these are very generic high-level categories. Just keep that in mind. When dealing with markets that are developing, or rather in developing regions, we actually focus more on solutions because customers typically need more than just the product. They also need you to set it up, provide training, make product support available, and so on. You are free on your own to change terms on any of our tools to make it, useful to you. You can make them your own. However, they cannot be altered and distributed to others. Okay, so again, basically you have a personal license to use this. You do not have a license to distribute all that we're sharing with you to others in your organization or elsewhere, except if it's like a team where you're working on a project. Okay, if you need distribution beyond that, then you need to contact us to get the appropriate license, and also to make sure that the people get the appropriate training. And also, when I say a team, I mean a small group, like 4 or 5 people, not a team of 100 people. Okay, so because essentially it's important to get the most out of this, there has to be a systematic, consistent way of doing it. And of course, if you're in our programs where we're partnering with you, providing you resources and funding, you're going to find that personally you can alter tools and do different things with them to make it very useful to you. But we keep our tools the way they are so that we can evaluate on a consistent basis how people are doing. Okay, so now let's talk about the whole solution. With a whole solution, this diagram represents, the whole solution for your venture might include only one of these dimensions, but more than likely it will include at least the generic solution, of course, to start. In the seed model canvas for venture, you can describe all the components of the whole solution to the problem noted earlier. The whole solution has several components. Now, when we mean this, basically you can, briefly describe your whole solution or your whole product, but ultimately you're going to have to unpack that in additional documents like your concept document and your business plan. As you saw earlier, a seed model can be developed for an entire enterprise, for a product or service line, for a process, or for a project. It all depends on the scope of your seed model. For the case study example, we are going to focus on the whole solution or whole product, but the general principles also apply to other types of solutions and different scopes of business models. The generic product is the most basic product you need to have in order to sell it to customers. The expected solution is what the customer really wants or expects for the product or service. The augmented solution are things you can add to the basic solution. An augmented solution is also known as a value add. The potential solution is the full extent of what the product, service, or solution could be. You may have heard of the technique of minimum viable product, MVP, which differs from whole solution or whole product. MVP looks for features that satisfy early adopters only. A complete set of features is only designed and developed after feedback from the users. This is an accelerated approach to prototype product, prove product, and then develop it. It is popular, particularly with the app development community. Now, one solution strategy, though, that you can use, and it's not MVP, but it is something that can help you accelerate. So in our case, for example, I mentioned that we really have a whole solution approach. So we are looking at, implementing it in a fuller version. Okay. Now our expected solution, we're not just doing generic, right? We're actually, in our case, doing expected solution. Actually, let me back up. We are doing a generic solution, but it has a lot of components that others might consider to be an expected or even augmented solution. So the point that I was trying to make is that depending on your organization, your focus, your market, what is a generic solution for one person may be an augmented solution for another company. Okay, so one of the simple strategies is to focus on getting the generic solution in first, because that is the level at which you're pretty sure that customers will buy your product. Then in stages, you can continue to release versions of the product that comprise the expected solution, then the augmented solution, and then the potential solution. This diagram represents versions of a solution that can be released over time by moving from a generic solution again to a potential one. You offer the core product first, then you add one or several items, and keep it going. So actually what we're seeing a lot of is we're seeing someone put out a core product, but that they have an accelerated process of putting additional features and functions and even other products on the market. So it's more like a cascading or rolling implementation. Event your scope and your objective for servicing the market affects your generic solution. In our case, again, we decided that we couldn't provide only coaching and development services and expect that to sell. Given the nature of our market, we decided that our generic or core solution needed to include all of the things that we do at some level, okay? Not necessarily everything like within funding or within support, but a certain set of items in every single part of our solution. So for us, that could include aspects of funding, providing support, doing the coaching, and also developing alongside of our customers. So this bundle of services is our core solution. It is larger and again more complex than it is for many other businesses in our market space. This is the case because we need to disrupt the market and create a new solution that works entirely different to overcome the competition and other challenges in our unique market space. We are actually involved in radical innovation, which, by the way, takes longer to bring to life. So for example, if you're doing something that is incremental innovation, you can expect, I shouldn't say expect, but a more typical timeline for you to really start generating revenues and growing is 5 years, which you hear a lot of, right? You hear a lot of people saying that, you know, anything that's a company that's less than 5 years is a startup. But with radical innovation, the timeline is more like 10 years. Okay, and so I can testify to that. Okay. So the generic or core solution and also the whole solution will be very different, again, from product to product, from solution to solution, and from organization to organization. The team working on the solution must become very adept at figuring out the scope of the solution. The purpose of going from idea to concept to proof of concept is to help you sharpen that ability. After you identify the problem and get a solid understanding of the people involved, you can figure out aspects of the solutions that can be applied. So here I have an example, again, of just showing you a whole solution example. There was a generic solution, but then there were other things, for example, that the customer might expect to see as a part of the product, right? So maybe when you first started, you really didn't have strong support or a strong support system because the demand was high. You never, for whatever reason, never thought about, you know, support, having a support number, or having a separate staff for that. And so then now maybe support and accessories were actually the big things that the customer expected, right? So this is the expected solution. But then now, in addition, you find that you can have augmented services or augmented offerings. And in this case, those could be training and services. So, you know, again, the features of all of these components would still, you know, need to be categorized as expected, augmented, or potential. So for example, like in our case, like I said, you could actually have many different parts, right, that are part of the generic solution. So there might be training and services and accessories and support. It's a bundled, right, group of products and services, right, that are the generic solution. But then there are aspects of all of these that are expected, then augmented, and then the full potential. As an example, with training, we might offer advanced training on creating an innovation system out of our methodology. We consider that to be an augmented layer or part of the full potential of what we have developed. It's not something that we would start right now. Okay? So then I've been basically throwing out the word experience several times in this workshop and in different contexts. So I want to make sure that there's some clarity about this because we don't get much into it in this workshop, but in following workshops we do. And so I just want to make sure there's not confusion. So first of all, in Module 3, we spoke about different ways to serve people. So experience is one way. It deals with experience as a market. Second, user experience is the experience users have with your product. And then third, customer experience is the entire experience a customer has with your brand, including your products, your people, your documents, your facilities, etc. We don't talk much again about this in this workshop, but again in subsequent workshops we do deal with this in great detail. So when we talk about any product, doesn't matter if it's a whole solution, whole product, or product service, or a solution, or even a commodity, we need to talk about features versus benefits. As you see here, features describe the product, for example, what it can do, its specifications, and its dimensions. Features are functional attributes illustrating what the product can do, like training, washing a car. It is describing how your product, service, or solution works. In some cases, some of this may show up on work you've done for the problem to possibilities matrix. It just depends on the level of detail, your understanding. But again, it's depending on the person or the group that actually use the tools and their style, right, of iteration and ideation. So in this, it will typically be based on how detailed you get, right? So if you're more detailed, more of an engineering type, more than likely somewhere in some of these tools that we have, you probably detailed some stuff that might be considered a feature. And again, you experienced a similar thing with the problem component of the seed model canvas, right? It's really the same thing. How people work with the tools, with the process, has a lot to do with their style. And that's okay. Everyone can have a different style. They can have a different way of approaching it. We just want to make sure that in whatever they do, they're creating a good discipline in order to create new things. Okay, so a product, service, or solution also has benefits, which are the end results the product provides to a customer. A benefit is what your product does for the customer. The benefits are the ways that the features make your customer's life easier by increasing gain, another word for pleasure, or decreasing pain. You can list the benefits by visualizing the ways the customer's life is made for the better as a result of your product. For example, selling a food product like fresh, lean hamburgers, the benefit is that it provides the customer a high-quality source of energy and nutrients for living. Advantages are sometimes confused with benefits, so let's also look at this definition. Advantages are those things which a feature does that ultimately leads to a benefit. Advantages can be used when comparing competing products in terms of their relative ability to provide a benefit. They can also be used to help the solution producer consider different ways that the solution can be configured so that the feature of the solution can do a better job of providing a particular benefit to a customer. So essentially, what is being compared is not so much competitors' varied offerings, but more or less advantageous ways in which the solution provider can make a feature produce a benefit. The solution provider can configure a feature in varied ways to produce different paths that lead to the desired customer benefit. One path may be more advantageous than others, and that can be to the solution provider, customer, or other stakeholders. As an example, suppose you are selling a hamburger at a fast food store you own. The cardboard container is a feature of your solution that protects the food from being made inedible. It also protects the customer's clothes, car, kids, and other property from being soiled by the product. The cardboard container feature offers the advantage of protection. Since the container can protect the food more effectively than, say, a paper wrapper, the benefit that the customer will ultimately derive from the protection advantage of this feature is greater convenience, peace of mind, and time savings. So again, protection is the advantage, but the benefits are greater convenience, peace of mind, and time savings. For example, the customer will not have to worry about wasting time to clean up a mess or having to return to the fast food place to buy another hamburger because the 2-year-old has accidentally knocked the bag off the car seat and the hamburger has fallen out of both the bag and its paper wrapper onto the dirty floor of the car. Now consider another product like charcoal used for a grill. While charcoal is burning, it generates heat, which can ultimately lead to the benefit of the customer being able to cook their food and get something to eat. An advantage of a particular brand or variety of charcoal is that the better variety might contain a special feature, a certain ingredient or a certain type of processing, so that it can produce higher heat over a long period of time before it burns out, leading to other benefits for the customers. So the advantage that was created by that feature is the higher heat that runs over a longer period of time. Now, we're going to just do a quick group discussion just to get you into the idea of how to look at features and benefits. So recall that our case study solution is a one-stop shop that empowers entrepreneurs to develop and grow bankable and sustainable ventures. So on this, please provide additional benefits for training and coaching. Okay, and so I'm going to pause, and so the facilitator is going to let you do this discussion. Okay, now that you've done that, now provide additional features based on our solution statement. And again, that statement is one-stop shop that empowers entrepreneurs to develop and grow bankable and sustainable ventures. And with these features, also add benefits as well. One comment I want to make, though, is that sometimes it may be easier just to figure the benefits and just have a group of features and a group of benefits. Okay, it doesn't have to be a one-to-one relationship or one-to-many relationship, and that's because when you first start, many of these things are vague. So breaking them down into more concise definitions or specifications is difficult. So it's fine. Just list your features on one side and list all of your benefits on the other. So I'm going to pause in order to let you have this discussion, or I should rather say that the facilitator is going to put me on pause. Now, I want you to remember, on the whole, the features are not what convinces people to buy your solution. Instead, the benefits are what do the actual convincing, in most cases. The exception is with innovations. Features alone can attract customers. For example, people who love to have the latest gadgets get excited by the features list. The newness of a product and the features themselves give geeks an opportunity to learn, to have fun, to show off their cool new toys, and to get a level of prestige and bragging rights. These are all benefits to them, by the way. Even in this, like I said, you can translate a lot of this to benefits. So it's not the new features that convince this type of customer to buy, but the expected benefit of having something new and interesting to play with. But generally, benefits trump features alone. Now, when we're talking about features and benefits, and when we're talking about the whole solution, we were focused on the user experience, okay, because it's related directly to the product, correct? So now we're going to just talk a little bit about the customer experience. And a model that's good for evaluating or interpreting customer experience is based on the 7 P's of marketing. It's really focused on the marketing strategy, but again, it creates a nice framework also for looking at your customer experience. The product dimension is obvious because we've been talking about that quite a bit. Remember, I spoke of user experience, referring to how users experience your product. Again, just reminding you. User experience is actually a part of customer experience. Product factors include quality, branding, features, availability, etc. The price dimension refers to the price strategy you have for your product. This dimension includes factors like discounts, credits, payment methods, etc. The promotion dimension is any marketing communication used to inform or persuade potential customers of the merits of a product. It includes factors like sales promotion, direct marketing, etc. The place dimension is how your product gets to the target market. Factors include marketing channels and sales support. Product, price, promotion, and place are the essential dimensions of customer experience for products. A fuller perspective, which is important for services and solutions, includes people, process, and physical evidence. The people dimension revolves around the people involved in the customer experience. Factors include people working on marketing and customer support, culture, training, recruitment, etc. The process dimension refers to the background processes involved in the customer experience. Factors include IT, research and development, customer focus, etc. The physical evidence dimension involves the physical contact that customers have with your brand or product. Factors can include packaging, online experience, and etc. So now that we've gone through some of the background around a solution, we're actually going to have you now focus on defining the solution for the case study. For this activity, you do not need to address question 4.1 in the concept document outline because we already have a solution, right? We already have one, and you're not going to unpack many. We're just going to focus on the one. So for this, make sure that you pull out your output from the problem to possibilities matrix, stakeholder analysis worksheet, and customer profile, and even, of course, the seed model canvas that you were working on, and any other notes that you may have made as you were unpacking the problem component of the seed model canvas. But I just wanted to interject something here. And again, this is a fictitious scenario, but it's very typical. Interestingly, after having done further research and continually iterating the solution, our case study team determined that the solution should be different. This is a very typical occurrence in early stage development. Our new solution statement is a one-stop shop that empowers the development of, engagement with, and capitalization of sustainable ventures throughout their life cycle. What the fictitious team realized is that ventures and their stakeholders, their stakeholder ecosystems, need to be woven together to support the success of the venture. So while the primary customer is entrepreneurs, the solution is also important to funders, partners, and others. So once you have gotten yourself organized with all of the different pieces that I mentioned, again, you're going to answer as many questions about the solution in the solution section of the concept document outline. This is basically the same that we did when we were doing problem. Concisely describe the solution in the solutions component of the seed model canvas. You're going to complete this in groups of 3 or 4. You have 20 minutes, and afterwards we will debrief. On this particular activity, you do not need to spend a long time on each question, nor do you need to really discuss questions, unless you're doing it for understanding. Answer what comes to your mind initially. You'll have time later to dig deeper in other sections. So please form your groups now and get settled, and then the facilitator will start the activity in a few minutes, and the facilitator will also put me on pause. Okay, so now that you've organized yourselves, let me just reiterate the solution statement: a one-stop shop that empowers the development of, engagement with, and capitalization of sustainable ventures throughout their life cycle. And so again, remember that you have 20 minutes. Go ahead and start. Facilitator, please put me on pause. Okay, your time is up. So for the debrief, we're going to have each group share how you described or elaborated the solution component of the seed model canvas. And note that as we're going through this, as before, the output may vary from group to group for a variety of reasons. If it had been individuals who had done this on their own and then came together as a group, the first thing they would have been done, or what they would have done, would have been to compile the different output to make sure that everyone had a say. The next step, or logical step, would have been to allow everyone to explain what they contributed. Finally, and perhaps over time, the group would need to come to consensus on what the description or elaboration of the solution component is. Okay, so go ahead, put me on pause, and have your discussion. So let me ask you, now that you've gone through this, There are many different ways, obviously, of generating a business model or initial seed, either individually or in a groups. But what's important for you to get is to feel comfortable in the process and the tools that we're providing. So let me ask you these questions, and then you can have a group discussion with the facilitator moderating. How were the questions in the concept document outline useful to you? What did the questions and tools make apparent to you about transforming an idea into a concept? What else did you learn from this activity? So again, put me on pause while you have this discussion. This activity underlines the importance of getting into the habit of using the different tools and any work you have done previously, and connecting the work between tools and documents. Later in the workshop, you will transfer appropriate information over to the idea roadmap so that you can keep it before you. The seed model canvas and concept document are also documents you keep before you and update as you iterate. This will help you create an action plan for further research and idea cultivation. When you understand the problem, are thinking about the solution, and have a good grasp of the stakeholders, then you can work backwards from the solution to figure out other things, like who the partners and channels are, how you're going to structure your revenue, and how you need to deal with other important components in the seed model. Now, we don't get into it here, but another way to look at this is to look at your strengths. You can do a SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And you can list for yourself the different assets, the different forms of value you have, partnerships, IP, and you can actually go from that side in order to create something that might be useful to a market. The only problem, though, is when people tend to do that, they tend to not anchor it into the actual problem and the customers, okay? So it's very important that again, you can do that. You can do that from your experience being in the field, observing things, but don't go off, just doing the product, making and doing it based on assumptions. Go through the process of looking at the problem, looking at the stakeholders, looking at the customer, doing the idea cultivation, so that again, you'll be anchored in the right things in order to bring your product to market. Now, also with this, the problem, solutions, and stakeholders are the three anchors for developing the rest of the seed model canvas. So once you really get a good fix on those three things, the other stuff starts, figuring itself out, and opportunities and people and partners and resources, can start aligning. But again, it also depends on the maturity of the business model. Now, the facilitator will take any additional questions that you have. And then we'll put me on pause, and then we'll continue with this module. Okay, so before we get into looking at stakeholders specifically, I wanted to review the business model definition that I gave you earlier, because there's a key thing that we want to capture. And that key thing is important when we're looking or when we're developing a business venture or a project. So read the definition to yourself and consider what is the key thing we are trying to achieve with the business model or seed model. And then I'll give you a few moments, and then I'll give you an answer. The one thing that's most important is trying to create value. It's not about making money or acquiring stuff. It's about value, but that means different things to different people. So we need to be able to identify the value that stakeholders bring and what they derive from what we are developing or offering. Or with stakeholders, we also need to understand not what we perceive they're getting, but what they want to get and what they think they're getting. The reason I bring up value is that the relationship between the seller or offerer and the customer or the other stakeholders represents that value, as well as the resources or things that are coming through that relationship. So the relationship is a value exchange. Even if you're not doing direct business together, but you are interacting, that is exchange of value. And that, of course, is under the assumption that you're sharing useful information, time, or other things. When a reciprocal exchange structure is in place, a situation of co-creating exists or is possible to exist. What are we doing now? What have we been doing all during this workshop? We are co-creating through the interaction, through this dialogue. Your groups are developing possibilities, okay? And so this is the beauty of stakeholders and stakeholder ecosystems, when you have people that are actively working with you, even if they're not in your organization, but they're willing to lend themselves and their resources to helping you, even if it's in a small way. Now here, I just brought up this slide because I just wanted to remind you again that when we're talking about value, there are many different types of value. And even the ones that I've listed here, you can even identify more and define them differently, okay? Value varies in terms of each individual person's perception. This demonstrates the need to be customer focused or stakeholder focused. If you don't spend enough time with customers and stakeholders and you don't have much of a relationship with them, how are you going to figure out what value they can bring to a relationship and what is of value to them? Interaction, engagement, and co-creation are ways to understand the people you are serving. When you do these things with others, you and your stakeholders get a reciprocal benefit from the exchange of value that naturally occurs. You get the information you will need to develop a product they will like or a service they will purchase. Your business or venture should strive to be the center of its own ecosystem and to develop in a way that allows you to co-create with your stakeholders. A big reason for doing this is that today things move so fast. You need every resource you can get to remain relevant to your ecosystem. If you don't create your structures and your operations to accommodate this, remember that you will get what you plan for and decide to do. If you want to grow to be like an Apple or an Amazon, you must have a different mindset, one that enables you to create a different type of product and environment. Now, this is this might shock a few people, but this diagram shows here, or really captures, the difference between businesses and other organizations that focus on shareholder value versus stakeholder value. What should ventures be about? They should be about value creation, about empowerment and creativity. So what have you been experiencing in this workshop? So what you've been experiencing in this workshop is an introduction to a different paradigm that leads to different results than the traditional way of handling value. When developing the seed model, we spend a lot of time on the problem, the solution, and the stakeholders. If you can get those three nailed down, you can figure out the rest of the seed model. Unfortunately, many business developers don't think that way. They focus more on other things such as revenue goals or their partners. The problem, the solution, and stakeholders are what really anchor the business model. They are the cornerstones of any business model. Going back to the early stage development diagram you saw near the beginning of this workshop, those three cornerstones also appear in the form of the problem, the people, and the possibilities. Okay, so they're really linked, just different words. Here the diagram on the left side shows a traditional paradigm, which is an existing value distribution model that works in the service of producing shareholder value. Remember, those are the people who've invested money or have received stocks because of their work or contribution to the organization. It starts at the bottom here and seeks to distribute the venture's existing value through efficiency, vertical control, and financial measures to produce short-term results in the form of shareholder value. Now, the diagram on the right side shows an emergent paradigm, which is a strategic value creation model that works in the service of stakeholder value. It starts at the bottom here and seeks to increase value through a focus on effectiveness, empowerment, and creativity, and holistic measures to produce sustainable, transformative results in the form of stakeholder value. As you can see, the emergent model of strategic value creation shares the venture's value far more broadly and sustainably than does the traditional one. And so this is it starts with a mindset, right? It then becomes institutionalized and becomes a system. And so in the markets where most companies operate and work, they think in the traditional sense. Okay, and so therefore, because of that, there are results. We see it not only in individual companies, but we see the results in our markets, right? And so things get perverted and out of whack. So much emphasis is put on shareholder value that the community and the and staff, for example, can be totally forgotten in the equation, and they're the ones that actually help support the venture. Okay, so this new, and I won't say a new paradigm because this is the way it should have always been. So I believe that the essence of this was originated somewhere and used and is still used for centuries, not in the modern context, but I believe that there are people and organizations that understand this. And our hope, though, is that we want to have a lot more of them in order to affect our markets and our economies in a more positive way. So the last thing before we actually look at unpacking the stakeholder and stakeholder relationships components of the seed model canvas is I just want to bring up the definition of value proposition. We're not actually going to focus on it here, but we are talking about value, so this is a key component of the seed model canvas. So a value proposition is a promise of value to be delivered. It's the primary reason that a stakeholder will contribute to you, and that includes paying you cash for your product. When we do something because it is a higher calling, volunteer or unpaid service, for example, we don't necessarily look for an exchange of value. We do it because it's just the right thing to do. And the reason, again, I mention this is because we talked about transcendence, where we do things to help people fulfill their destiny. Now, when I mean that we don't expect money, a higher calling, it's not that we don't expect to see value involved, but we're not so centered on the money or the materialism in order to achieve the success of our organization. But of course, organizations need cash, they need revenue, or they need something to inject to keep them moving. They need cash flow. So let's think back to the Maslow hierarchy of needs again. Most people, again, are working at the basic level, the belonging level, or the personal achievement level. In all these cases, most people are expecting to get something back from what they put into it. That's just human nature, and that's okay. Okay, that's not a problem with that. When you work with a stakeholder, you must understand the needs of both sides, meaning that it needs to be a reciprocal exchange of value. So with us at Global Stratos, we are very intentional about not just getting people to do things for us, because we actually do a lot of these stakeholder ecosystem type things in the early stages because people don't want to put much money into something that they're not sure it's going to work. Okay, and we have our own methods for being cost effective in that early stage. We also, of course, then want to understand what the stakeholders need out of it. So again, that we're intentional about doing this two-way exchange. And it's more than that in the relationship. It shouldn't just be, looking at two-way. There are many different factors and things that help create value for all parties. But we want to make sure that there is that element where we can correlate, where we can say, if you're a part of this and you take the risk and take the responsibility and the response and you work with us, that you will get a reward. And we have a lot of people who refuse. That's just because we're a social enterprise, so they like what we're doing, but that's not necessarily going to be typical for every company. But the point is, it's just to find mechanisms. So of course, we don't explain in this workshop how we do all of that. We will highlight some of that in the next workshop for this, which is mapping, developing, and leveraging assets. And that's in order to strengthen your venture. So value can be expressed in terms of, or can explain how your services solve stakeholders' problems, improve their situation, which is relevancy, and deliver specific benefits, which can be considered quantified value. Just keep this in mind when you're thinking about stakeholders and as you're unpacking this section in the seed model canvas. So again, we're going to do an activity, and this time you're going to focus on the stakeholders and stakeholder relationships sections or components of the seed model canvas. At this point, we're going to skip over the unique value proposition component, And these are typically, the unique value proposition and impact are typically done last after you've worked out the other pieces, and then you focus on those two central components. Remember, there are different stakeholder groups, even in this scenario, right? Even in this case study. One group is the customer, which in our case is the entrepreneur. And the customer, again, is the person who's paying for the solution, and the consumer is actually the person who is using it, right? So maybe another scenario where entrepreneurs and funders are involved, which is something that can happen in our particular business model, is that, let's say it's a bank that's a funder. They're willing to loan entrepreneurs money, but they want to know that their strategy, their operations, and other things are, good to go. And so they hire us to actually work with their entrepreneurial customers. Okay, and so that's one of our revenue streams. So the key thing to remember is that in this, a consumer can be different from the customer. And another example is, again, with a household that has teenagers who typically do not have much money, the parents are the customers, the buyer, and the consumer is the teenager. As you further define and elaborate on your idea, your solution, in terms of stakeholders and stakeholder relationships, you can use what you have already done with the stakeholder analysis worksheet, the ideas on stakeholders and stakeholder relationships that you jotted down while working through the problem need description and solutions questions in the concept document outline. Other questions in the concept document outline, and these are the questions that you'll begin to unpack. You'll be looking at section 5, customers and markets, section 6, community and stakeholders, and section 7, stakeholder relationships. So just at this point, because now you've actually been able to go through several of the components of the seed model canvas, I'd like for you to describe the difference between when we first started this and what you're doing now. What are some things that you might notice are a little bit different? Okay, when we first started with this idea, the problem to possibilities matrix, and now you're actually working on unpacking the seed model canvas, the seed model rather, by using the seed model canvas and the concept document outline. So just think about this. So in your response, remember, try to reflect on the ideation process you are engaging in now. And this is a thinking process, okay? You don't have to say this out loud. The facilitator may ask you to provide some input. Think about where you started with the idea and how you are now discussing and expressing your understanding of each component of the seed model. So here are just a few answers that you could possibly have given. A good answer might be that earlier the idea was vague and intangible, but now it has been elaborated more in all of the components that we've looked at up to now, especially the problem, the solution, and now we're getting ready to look at stakeholders. So these are more tangible and structured. It's easier to see what we know and don't know. We can identify gaps and research needs, or determine what further research we need to do. Another answer might be that each section complements the others and makes the big picture of the seed model more complete. Integration and creation of linkages occur. For example, you can now say that we have the solution, but what influences the solution? The answer is the stakeholders, the channels, the revenue generation, the costs, etc. Okay? So when you're thinking about these tools and the process, don't think about just the literal things that we're talking about, but think about the different things that you can leverage from doing this process and using the tools and the templates and other things that we provide. Okay? Some things are obvious and a lot of things are not. So now let's look at the instructions for the activity focused on stakeholder and stakeholder relationships. It's going to go pretty much exactly like you did previously. So you're going to pull out the output that you've worked on previously, tools, notes, everything. And then you're going to answer as many questions about stakeholders and stakeholder relationships in the customer and market section, community and stakeholder relationship sections of the concept document outline. Okay, so that's really not any different, except we're now dealing with different sections. Okay, so once you've answered the different questions, then you're going to concisely describe what you elaborated in the stakeholder and stakeholder relationships components on the seed model canvas. And you're going to stay in the same groups. In fact, you'll stay in the same groups for the rest of the workshop. You have 30 minutes, and afterwards we will debrief. So again, you can start the activity, okay? And put me on pause, and when we come back, we'll then do the debrief. Okay, so for this, we just have, again, a very straightforward debrief. Each group share how you described or elaborated the stakeholders and the stakeholder relationships components of the seed model canvas. And the facilitator can put me on hold right now. And to close this particular debrief, I want to ask the question, how comfortable are you with working with the tools and process on your own? And the reason that we say this is we want to make sure that you are able to, to do the work and also feel that you are able to accelerate and develop your product or your solution. Okay. And if you're not, have the facilitator pause and you can have a discussion, because those are things that we want to know, and we want to ensure that you're catching on to the process and, again, how to use the tools. So in closing, I just want to make note and say that this particular module should give you the foundation of using the tools that we have introduced. There's one more tool that we'll introduce, but in the next module, you're going to just unpack the seed model canvas. And so because of that, you should have a good grounding right now. Okay, you won't remember everything, you won't know everything, but certainly you should expect to see that you're getting a little bit of rhythm with the tools that we have. Okay, so now for these key points that you've learned about, I'd like you to discuss them and provide particulars, and the facilitator will moderate this and put me on pause. Okay, I'm just going to make some ending comments. When we talk about aspects of learning about whole solutions, remember that the whole solution can have components of generic, expected, augmented, and potential. Types of experiences include the experience market, user experience, and customer experience. You need to understand the difference between features and benefits when describing and defining solutions for your seed model. Features are the what of the product, service, or solution. They are the physical or other characteristics, the thing the solution lets the customers do and interface with. Benefits are how the product, service, or solution can help the customer and other stakeholders achieve their goals, meet their needs, and solve the targeted problems. Customer experience can be described in terms of the 7 P's of marketing: product, price, people, process, physical, place, and promotion. In the early stages of an idea or venture in particular, it is very iterative, and the variety of tools used form a web of structured research, analysis, and development. The degree and depth to which you can elaborate the components from the concept document outline often indicates how mature and how well developed your venture is, or how well you've researched, analyzed, and designed it. So that's it for the module. If the facilitator, in order to end this module, is going to do a Q&A of several minutes, so please feel free to ask questions. And if there are questions that the facilitator is not able to answer, they will forward those questions to us or to me so that we can respond. Thank you again, and I look forward to speaking with you or leading you through Module 7.